As you can see, I live in Philadelphia, though a lot of people are confused about that. The reason why they're confused is the University Medical Center of Kernighan, for about 8 years, paid 20% of my salary to claim that they had one of the most cited psychologists in the Netherlands on their faculty. And all I needed to do was just list them as my affiliation of my publications. So I didn't know I was going to be here. I thought it was going to be another panel with Lou last week. And I got an invitation. And Professor Coyne, the Dutch Behavior Therapy Association, thought I lived in the Netherlands, and they thought I could just come over and do a talk. As it was, I was traveling through, and I said, sure. And normally when I'm not a behavior therapist, although I often give talks to behavior therapists as kind of a critic in debate, and I get paid lots of money. This time they're asking me to come for free, although they allow me to have a free afternoon attendance, admission to the conference. And I thought, well, it's very important, I'll do that. And then right afterwards, the word got out that I was coming, and the cognitive behavior therapist panicked. And they said, very sorry to inform you that unfortunately, we have to pull back the invitation to debate at our Congress. We were looking forward to hear about your view on CBT-ME, but our main goal is to organize a respectful and balanced debate. Based on further information and previous experiences, we feel obliged to search for another candidate. And so then Lou pulled out of the conference, and I'm not sure, did anybody go? I think the panel collapsed. A little bit about me. When they had the High Tribunal in the UK about release of the PACE data to Alan Matthews, they only allowed the PACE investigators a very short time to speak. And Trudy Chalder got up and she put a slide or a tweet for me, and she said, this is the kind of person that will get a hold of our data if we release it to the patients. It will cause severe reputational damage. That's why we can't do it. And the tribunal ruled that that's exactly why, if people of my accomplishments wanted to look at the data, it should be made available. And so they released the data. I myself was involved, and Alan only asked for a small portion of the data. And I asked for the rest, the whole data set, because the PLOS investigators, excuse me, the PACE investigators had published in a journal called PLOS One, where I was an editor. And we had a requirement that if you publish there, you have to promise to make your data available. And so I said to them, okay, give me your data. And we got in a long battle that took years, and I didn't get the data, but I got a warning note on their paper saying that they had not complied with the practices. So I come sort of pre-hated, and last year I was also passing through Europe, and I was going to Tuscany for my birthday, and I spoke at another unrest gathering, and at the end of the gathering, there were two women just hugging and crying at the back of the room. And I was on my way out to dinner, but it really struck me. We'd had the movie, we had the panel, and I said, excuse me, could I give some assistance? And they said, one had started, the other one had to finish for her. They said, we're two physicians, we're GPs, and we just stumbled into this movie tonight, and the panel, and we're crying because of all the harm we've done to patients. We never realized it by doubting the patients, by suggesting that it was in their head. And I said, well, and I said, what can we do? I said, I don't know, but I think that it's very important that you've come to this realization, and maybe we can get some other people to the realization. In a couple days, actually, I leave tomorrow at 7 a.m. to give a TEDx talk in Slovakia on mindfulness about, is it just a placebo? And I'm a known critic and I'm a known skeptic. And then I go back to Ireland. I just pop around Europe. I love the budget flights. Once you get over here, you can't stop. My wife and I consider ourselves digital nomads. But I'm going to Ireland. It's very important to me because the psychologist I'm meeting with named Brian Hughes, and he says, I know nothing about chronic fatigue syndrome, but I saw your writings about the PACE trial, and I got so worked up about it, I put a chapter in my book on it. And it turns out that he just gave a presentation to David Tuller and in Northern Ireland, and it's only a couple weeks old. There have been 10,000 views. And so these sort of outreach are very important to me. I don't have anyone in my family with chronic fatigue syndrome. I came into the whole activism, the whole debate, as an example of terribly bad science that needed with a conflict of interest. When I entered the battle in October 2015, I wouldn't say I was close friends with Michael Sharp, but I owed him 2 bottles of wine because he had bought the last 2 one night arguing about something. I wouldn't say I was a close friend of Trudy Chalder, but she owed me a dinner. And Simon Wesley and I were in regular correspondence. I had spent 6 months as a Carnegie Centenary visiting professor in Scotland, and I was charged with going out and doing pub talks, grand rounds, things like that. And so I got really connected, and I lost an awful lot of friends once I entered into this. I've been vilified, but I think that goes with the territory. And so I really wanted the opportunity.
Not working?
I may be doing something wrong. There's a reason why I got out of engineering. Please keep making these outrageous statements, and I keep challenging him to a debate. A member of the Dutch Health Council. And now he's claiming, I guess last year, the PACE investigator concluded CBT leads to decreased levels of fatigue and overall improvement of well-being. Based on supplementary analyses, they included a subgroup of patients who made a full recovery. They were curing chronic fatigue patients. And I say chronic fatigue because in the Netherlands, what you study, what you treat, is not a chronic fatigue syndrome. It's chronic fatigue. It's tiredness. The criteria are so loose. They include so many patients. They fill their clinics with people who don't have the diagnosis. Very often, it's comorbid depression they're treating. Give you a little bit about my background. If you would ask me in 1990s, or if you ask my colleagues, they'd say, Jim Coyne is the person in the psychiatry department that if you want chronic fatigue to be treated, he's excellent, he gets people moving. The situation was, and I actually ended up doing a lot of harm, but let me explain how I got that reputation. I was attached to a specialty mood disorders unit, and we get people who were chronically depressed, people that had to be 2 years depressed without any response to treatment. We'd bring them on the specialized unit, we'd take them off all their meds, they had lots of meds, and then they'd rebuild their medications and see which worked. And we had permission from the insurance company for extended stays, which aren't possible anymore. Many of these people their lives were devastated because they just couldn't do anything. They often complained of tiredness, but it was kind of a leaden tiredness. It was a different quality to it. I would give them small tasks to get them going. Something simple. You can see me as soon as you go out and find the name of 4 dogs tied up to the fire hydrant, tied up to the parking meters. The idea is just get them moving and take your time. And of course, you don't talk to the dogs; you talk to the owners. Little tasks like that. Or here's a napkin. Pull some Kleenex out. Bring me 4 pieces of cheese from a gathering that you want to go to. Just simply go in there, get the cheese, and say, and anybody asks, what are you doing? He said, sorry, I'm bringing this to Dr. Coyne, I can't stay. And it was keeping the task very small, challenging, and amusing. The press people would grumble that they'd do it and they'd get moving again. So the word got out, and some of my colleagues started writing papers about chronic fatigue syndrome. The criteria were so loose back there, we didn't know. So then we started getting referrals from rheumatology. Started doing the same thing. These were patients coming in a different referral route. They were different kinds of patients. I gave them the assignments, got the same smiles and excitement, and I'd call the patient. Patients call me, that was wonderful, it was so helpful. Bam! A couple days later, they'd be on their back. And I just thought, well, that's strange. What, I don't understand. And I had a few patients like that before I got frightened of getting more referrals from rheumatology, because it was a different referral. They were seeing a different class of patients. Our patients were predominantly melancholic depression, who were coming out of that. Their lives were in shambles. They were very exhausted. They had non-restorative sleep, but they were entirely different. And I stopped seeing any patients from rheumatology after that. But I had no idea, because we didn't have the diagnostic criteria to capture the experience. Okay, so I really want to get clear in the debate, and he has a lot of illusions. I don't know. I can't believe that he believes some of the things he says. They're so ridiculous. I mean, I don't know what to say about that, but clearly he does not expect to be challenged. And, you know, I'm an American. We challenge people. And I thought we would have a debate, and obviously he doesn't want to have a debate. And so, you know, how he gets away making these claims. The PACE trial is an unblinded trial with subjective self-report measures. Under the conditions in which the PACE trial was done, homeopathy would look good. And I've done some, in my TED Talk coming up on Sunday, we actually talk about how homeopathy looks good when you have, because there's a lot of attention being given to the patient. They'll talk to a patient for 2 hours before they give them inert substances. There's nothing in those capsules. There's nothing in the water. But they talk to you for 2 hours. People really like that. They have subjective improvement, often better than in routine care, where the GP only talks to them for 5 minutes. Largely, it's non-specific factors. Furthermore, there was switched outcome. But what I think is really dodgy, do Dutch people use that word, dodgy? Yeah, is that the Dutch Health Council has 3 studies with objective data, and they're hiding the data. You have to go in and look for it. And all of those studies showed no objective improvement from the cognitive behavior therapy or from the exercise therapy. And like I said, this design would have made homeopathy look good. And the switching of outcomes, the originally proposed outcomes are the ones in orange. The switched outcomes are the ones in blue. And a patient, and you can see there's very little difference between the control group, SMC, exercise group, and the CBT. But they look huge. Everybody's improving if you use the other outcomes. Now, Mark Fink is a patient, he's a physician, and I really recommend his blog post, the article he wrote about testing himself by the criteria. And he found that when at one point he would have been ineligible because he was too severe to be in the trial. Once they switched, he would have been entered as a success. And then he would basically, you can get any result you want, yet it'd still be eligible cured by the criteria. It just shows what a shambles it is once you start playing with the outcomes that way. I recommend the article. It's very readable, it's very good. Okay, this is the hidden paper. If you go find this paper, he stuffed all the data in the paper, but basically, if you do actigraphy, I used to do actigraphy studies with cancer patients to find out what woke them up in the middle of the night. So the prostate patients, was it the hot flashes they were having, or was it it's an objective measure of activity. You wear them. They put them on patients in their studies, but then they hid all the data because they wasn't showing any improvement. So you get objective, a lack of objective improvement, but subjective satisfaction. And we'll say more about that. Okay, fatigue is neither a symptom nor a diagnosis. It's a bodily state. And patients who are fatigued often have other problems. If you do a global rating like they do, you'll find that what most impairs a person with chronic fatigue syndrome is not necessarily the fatigue. It could be the post exertion malaise. It could be the orthostatic hypotension, orthostatic intolerance. These are things that really interfere with people's lives. It could be the pain. I think the Dutch patients and the physicians need to appreciate, if you do a study in the Netherlands of cognitive behavior therapy or graduate exercise, it's inadmissible as evidence in the United States because the diagnostic criteria are too loose. The Americans will not even, when they update their evaluations of treatments for chronic fatigue syndrome, they won't even consider a study from the Netherlands. So what happened was the American government commissioned the Institute of Medicine report, and they emphasized that there needed to be more attention to post-exertional malaise and getting more ill after with ME. Now, we need to appreciate, and there's controversy within the Netherlands, not all patients have ME who have chronic fatigue syndrome. It's a very loose definition. But for patients who do have ME, this is a defining symptom. And it's a symptom that will be worsened if they exercise. That's very important. And it's also known, we'll talk a little bit more about PEM, but you can do an exercise test and a person will be fine immediately afterwards. It's only when you call them back a couple days later. And so a lot of the outcome data are illusory because they seem to be doing okay. And CBT and GET are no longer recognized by CDC, and the AHRQ, that's the Agency for Health Care Research and Quality, will no longer accept CBT GET studies based on the Oxford criteria, which are used in the UK and in the Netherlands. These studies are inadmissible as evidence. So what did the Dutch Health Council? They said that the IOM is corrupt and anybody can buy their way on. It's a very prestigious group, and the head of the IOM wrote back an angry letter saying that nobody gets on. It's by election, and our criteria are very strict. They basically lied about the IOM. Okay, so this is a subgroup. Now I've done a little bit of work with biomarkers in psychiatry. We have very few. And you don't get a biomarker for a condition. You get a subgroup that has some measurable biological abnormality, and then you look at that group. It's kind of a bootstrap effort. You find people who have that abnormality. That means you exclude some people. and then you see if there are other correlates. And I think that very promising are some correlates of the measurements associated with the post-exertional malaise, but it won't be for all chronic fatigue patients. There'll be a subgroup. Okay. Okay. So it's patients talk about a crash, a relapse. It's probably very familiar to the people in the room here. By the way, you can go to the web and you can buy the Institute of Medicine document for about $75. We can download it for free. That's just the way they do things at the IOM. And I highly recommend this. Is a table that comes right out of it. It's an excellent table. Be armed. You need to arm yourself if you're going to deal with the Dutch physicians. Okay, so here are the proposed criteria in Institute of Medicine, and there's up in the left hand. That's a little. That's from the website. You look that up and you download the whole. Not only can the 500 pages, whatever it is, you can download for free. You can get very readable summaries too. So the diagnosis requires 3 symptoms: a substantial reduction or impairment in the ability to engage in previous levels of occupational, educational, social, personal activities. Persists for 6 months, accompanied by fatigue. But that's not enough. You have to have additional symptoms. Furthermore, you exclude major depression. If you don't, then you get a lot of patients who are just depressed. And there are different kinds of depression. There is some depression that are characterized by sadness, but there is some that basically a lack of affect. It's called anhedonia. And a lot of those patients, they don't seem particularly sad, but if you interview them, not only do they have a lack of pleasure, but they also have fatigue and non-restorative sleep. So it's a tough diagnosis, it's a tough separation. You have to spend time with patients, you have to get a history to make these distinctions. I don't believe that people should do exercise testing with patients presenting with suspected with chronic fatigue syndrome unless they do a careful history and to recognize the possibility of the damage being done. And it should only be done in the context of a personal history. It's only interpretable in the context of personal history. And so the post-exertional malaise and unrefreshing sleep, so those are required symptoms. All of them have to be present, but then at least one of the other two. And if you talk to a lot of the fatigue that chronic fatigue patients experience, it's more of a mental fatigue, it's a fog. And it's not necessarily, it's cognitive impairment. They recognize they just can't process things. And they can tell you right away, and when you bother to ask, they'll describe it graphically. And then finally, the orthostatic intolerance. That's worth an explanation by itself. And that's very dramatic in some people. It's subtle in others, but it's there. It's basically when you stand up, you get really dizzy, sometimes faint, you can sweat, you get nauseated, and as soon as you lie down, it goes away. It can be really dramatic. This came from Wikipedia. You can find very elaborate explanations, but this seemed damn good. You have to arm yourself. You have to educate yourself. I have a family member who has an autoimmune disease, certainly not chronic fatigue syndrome, but it took 5 years for her to be diagnosed. And she had to know her symptoms and her history better than all the specialists that she went to.
and she became kind of like a walking medical record. And now they want to write her up. But if she had been in the Netherlands, she probably would have got medically unexplained symptoms, and they would have stopped any kind of procedures. Yeah.
In the movie there was shaking. Also, very shaking.
It can be very dramatic, and basically, they just lose function, and it happens quickly. Okay. So some facts. ME has been classified as a disorder of the central nervous system since 1969. In 1988, it was renamed as chronic fatigue syndrome, and with a misplaced emphasis on fatigue. Fatigue isn't necessarily the most impairing symptom. And I think you have to be insistent when you're talking to physicians about that. Trust your own experience. And it's characterized by neurological, immunological, gastrointestinal, cardiovascular, and musculoskeletal features. Now, the Dutch keep attacking because we don't have a biological test. So what? That was true of Parkinson's for a long time. We still don't have a biological test of major depression. We had a good one for a while until people started using it with mildly depressed patients. Dexamethasone suppression test. We lost one biomarker in depression when people started over-applying it. It should have been based on a biomarker is not a test you have or don't have. It's when knowing what you know, does it add additional information? You shouldn't give it. We actually used the dexamethasone suppression test on the unit where I was, and some of the people, the Hamilton? Yeah, so we had the Hamilton test, and we would give the dexamethasone suppression test. So what you do is you give some dexamethasone at 4 o'clock, and the next day, the cortisol levels are really rising rather than being suppressed. Normally the drug suppresses them. And so we thought, oh, well, that's cool. But then the residents started giving it to each other. And that was totally not allowed. But they found that a resident who didn't have a biological depression, if they had to have a grand rounds the next day, they looked like the depressed people. But the issue is you shouldn't give it to residents, you should give people you suspect they have melancholia. Does that make sense? And I think a lot of this idea of the search for biomarkers is confused. We've never come on to biomarkers just as a test. You have, you don't have. Even glucose intolerance. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So it's something. So some of the, I would say 40% of the women, and they're mostly women on our ward, they had a melancholic depression that you needed different medication for. The other 60% probably had a character disorder, and there was aggravating their depression, and that had to be addressed. But once you can rule that out, but they look the same until you start carefully going after the history. And then somebody said, well, what if there's we test for the dexamethasone? And I think it was a valuable test for a while, and then we misused it. Okay. So CBT, the CBT they do in the Netherlands is not CBT. In the CBT, and let me jump ahead. That's Aaron Beck. He considers me one of his harshest critics. He once introduced me at a birthday party. He says, Coyne over there is like a wolf wandering around our herd of ideas, picking off the weak ones. Somebody needs to do it, otherwise the herd suffers. And so I've written a couple papers with him, but I've also been his harshest critic. And I've worked some work. Go back. There. Okay. Collaborative empiricism. What that is, that's a fancy term. What that means is you develop a problem area that's of interest to the patient. You decide to test the patient in their outside world, their life. You give them experiments to do. You don't tell the patient, you suffer from negative thinking. You instead tell them to go out and do a task, and if they come back and they were pessimistic, then you say, do you think that you may have been unrealistic? And do you think that maybe you found out something different? It's very collaborative. You listen to the patient. They pick what they want to work on. That's not what's done in CBT. Basically, it's like an exhortation. It's like having a Marine sergeant get you moving. I suspect that if you were doing Beck's style of CBT, a lot of the patients wouldn't pick the fatigue they wanted to work on. They'd pick out something that was more disruptive of their life. Okay, back when I was good, thought I was good, I had certain principles. I still believe those are good principles. I don't think that I should get caught up in trying to get people moving again. But I collaborated. I talk about their strengths as well as their weaknesses. I accept their limitations. If anything, I would restrain the patient from trying too hard so they'd argue with me. Rather than telling them, you got to go out and do this, to say, no, I want to do this. And I said, hold on. And they would come in, this was great. I said, well, could be an upswing in the cycle. I don't get caught up in therapeutic enthusiasm. And so it was a matter of not fighting with the patient. If you were mildly resisting their efforts, and you adapted to the readiness to work, you pursued limited goals. Nothing like what's done in cognitive therapy here. And the biopsychosocial model, I get so upset. What everybody, the rest of the world means by that okay, so I borrowed this slide from a friend. And this is the biopsychosocial model in the rest of the world. So you see the three. So what's very important about this model, it introduces psychology where it's been missing so far. So in managing diabetes, you sometimes need to think about the patient, how you get adherence. You need to think about how adhering to the regimen fits in their life. But very clearly, it's not a replacement for medical treatment. It is the Netherlands. So when I tell people I'm going to go attack the biopsychosocial model in the Netherlands, that makes sense to the Dutch people, but in the United States, they say, why do you want to do that? That's a good model. It's the different model. It's entirely different. Does that make sense? That you take the account that not only is there a disease, but there's a patient who has a disease, and the patient has a context. And you need to influence that patient. You need to get their trust, and you need to have a relationship with them. Because sometimes when you're working with a patient, it needs to matter more to them to please you than to look after themselves. They don't want to let you down. I used to work with HIV patients, and we used to we'd teach them problem solving. And they sometimes would say, you know, all these things we have to do to keep our adherence going, that was important. But that woman was so nice who would call us on the phone, and I knew she'd get in trouble with you guys if I didn't do what I had to do. See, that's the biopsychosocial model. See what I mean? Does that make sense? That we would try and teach them problem solving to adhere to the HIV medication. What were the barriers to that? The patients thought that this is a really nice woman who's really trying hard, and she's not like the infectious disease doctors. And that psychologist with them, oh. They were protecting our research assistant from us by increasing their adherence. And we kept track of the adherence with the MEMS caps. We actually got, not only did we get increased adherence, we got reduced viral load. It was based on the relationship. It was based on the psychosocial model. Not saying that the psychosocial model drives HIV, AIDS, but it's part of the context. And people get so upset with me in the United States when I say, I'm going to go attack BPS. Because they say, we're going to kick the, that's the basic support of what we're doing. That gives us a presence in our patients' lives. Stop it. Okay. ME is not mumps. If you go through the history of people with even MS, it takes years of medical contact before you arrive at a diagnosis. And when you decide that it is medically unexplained symptoms, you stop looking further. This is a horrible, I got this from their Finks group. They have a little pamphlet they give out explaining that you only have medically unexplained symptoms. And you can look up my blog, you look up Coin Around, my blog, and he complained to Close because he said I was libeling him by attributing ridiculous ideas to him. I showed where they were direct quotes.
Is this still working?
Huh?
Is this guy still working?
He was the person who imprisoned that patient in the... He came to speak on October 30th in the United States. The patients protested in the United States. He's spreading his model. I forget what he called it. He's got some special scale. That's rubbish. So my blog about him is psychotherapy for whatever ails your physician about you. Because it emphasized that one of the criteria for medically unexplained symptoms is that the physician had to believe that your concerns were exaggerated or that you were obsessed with them. And so you had to really, one of the criteria is that your patients, you basically had an unsympathetic physician. Okay. We want to go to, let's see. Oh, that's the, I already said that. That's the example of the woman, the two women crying in the back of the room. That was really moving. It's so hard to break out, though, because the patients and their advocates are so stigmatized. There were a lot of reprisals for me having gotten involved in this. They took away my blog at Close because they said there was conflict of interest that I continued to blog about the PACE trial while they were involved in legal action, trying to withhold their data from me. And when I wrote about it anyway, they took my blog away. And you're up against a powerful enemy. So the Close One told me, they said, back off, Jim. We will get you the data by December. We will have it. Just be quiet. Don't blog anything more about it. And so they actually, I think at that time they weren't lying. They believed they would. And then they started getting threatened by the PACE investigators. And so I kept pestering them. And so then they said, okay, we will put an expression of concern on the paper, or it would be the first step to retracting it. They sued and they stopped that. The Close One had a full procedure to release data. They got expensive lawyers and they never released it. I went after them at the Cochrane collaboration, tried to getting them to release some of the data for their analyses about the exercise. And I had an award from the Cochrane collaboration, the Bill Silverman Prize. They give it to people who are annoying and keep it up and force them to do things differently. I said, give you back that $1,000. I just want the data. And they hesitated and then they said no. And then there was the so-called withdrawal of the Cochrane exercise review. Two patients, one of them died as consumed by the effort. Bob and then Tom Kinnaman, it took a real toll on him. Bob died by suicide when he was, after being involuntarily
hospitalized. But at any rate, so they kept pestering Cochrane that this is an inadequate review. And they finally got it, and I kept badgering Cochrane saying it's conflict of interest. And I kept a duel with the senior editor of Cochrane in blogs. We have dueling blogs going back and forth. They finally decided the patients were right, and they were going to withdraw the review. And that's a big deal, because they rarely withdraw a review unless the authors ask for it. And no way did the patient authors want to do it. So what they do? They now say it's just going to sit there indefinitely. They're not going to do anything more. And it's just going to be a little warning label, but it'll probably still be used for treatment decisions. So that they can reverse, and they're ugly tactics. I had to look up vexatious because it's not a word I normally use, but Trudy Calder, who still owes me a dinner, went before this tribunal and said I was being vexatious. I had to look that up. That means I was just asking for the data to be annoying. And there's a lot of tone policing going on. You need to understand these tactics. What tone policing is, if you get upset about something because it matters to you, rather than deal with the issue that you're raising as a patient, they deal with the fact you're upset. And they neutralize you. And they keep focusing on that. You're upset patients. And then gaslighting. Gaslighting, psychological manipulation. You end up doubting your own sanity. Did I really say that? Did I get over emotional? And you question your memory, your perception, and your sanity. And the people using it against you, they deny. You see the Dutch Health Council deny your concerns. They misdirect. They contradict you. They outright lie. Gaslighting is one of the recommended words of the year. And I think it's become into prominence because people recognize that it's being widely used. So, I come pre-hated. They were able to off me from the meeting because I was a nasty person. It's okay. I've had my career. I wrote 400 papers. I'm tired of writing papers. And now I'm going to cash it in, and I'm going to be annoying. And thank you for coming to listen to me be annoying. Thank you. I had some other slides, and one of them acknowledged Frank and Anil. Anil's a very important influence on me. People know Anil? He's a ballet dancer, and he writes some incredibly good blogs. Some of them I envy. I wish I had written them because he does it very carefully. He looks at scientific issues, and we have corresponded back and forth. Like a lot of the patients, you never get to meet him. I've never met him. We talked about meeting him sometime when I came over. He said I couldn't take it and send me to another crash. He says, I got a friend, you can go have a beer with him, and he'll tell you about me, but don't come see me. And that's what we deal with the patient actors, the voice field. Tom Kindle in the same way. I said, I'm coming to Ireland. I'm part Irish, He says, that's good, but I'll give you some suggestions where to go, but don't come see me.
I have a question. I mean, there's obviously a group of psychologists that, they're kind of teamed up and they have their own views, and you're kind of like trying to challenge them, of course. And do you also have a support system behind you that can...
Limited. I'm kind of a lone wolf.
Okay.
I think of myself sometimes like a sniper in the tree. And I got a group of patients who advise me, and they pass me the email. They have command of the literature, and I may have like 6 or 8 people back me up, and 2 of them are functioning that day because they're all worked up about it, and they have crashes. and I just try picking off targets, and I'm hated for doing that. And Michael Sharp really sees me as someone capable of doing some real damage. So does Simon Wesley.
Perhaps following up on your question, do you, from your time, you spent some time in this country, and I'm sure you have a network of colleagues. Are there some colleagues that you think could be perfect allies in this?
Some of the journalists get it.
Some people who don't do enough but could do more.
It's hard. People are afraid to get involved in this controversy. The patients are presented so ugly. There's a movie called I Am Not Your Negro, and it's by James Baldwin, and it's about an African American going to Cambridge and feeling offended by the way he was treated. And he said the original version was not I'm Not Your Negro, but basically it's a wonderful movie challenging the way they treat people. And I think that there's a lot of characteristics the same, the way the attitude of the elite towards the patients. And the patients are a front to them because they're a drain on resources. One of the things that really offended me is in the UK, Peter White had the handicap parking passes taken away from patients when they come to clinics because they need to get out and walk.
Yeah.
That is so offensive.
Isn't that called the compassionate withholding of facilities?
Yeah, exactly, yeah. There's a whole politics of that. I have no one in my background is politics. I grew up on welfare. And my mother was able-bodied, but she had to take care of my stepbrother, half-brother, was basically living as a vegetable. For 13 years he couldn't move his own bowels or eat food. And so she had to take care of him. And there was a lot of flack we got about being an able-bodied woman. And so I'm sensitive to these issues about taking people's payments away from them. And that's the whole deal in the Netherlands and the deal in the UK. They don't care that the treatment doesn't work. They want to say, go to the treatment or you're not doing all that you can do. That's what it's about, and that's what's really sick. And you know, I'm an old guy, and I got a little bit of fight left to me, and keep fighting. Thank you.
Everyone, I just wanted to thank you for coming and staying. I know it's a bit late, but
I better get to the train station.
yes. Okay. Yeah. So take care. Have a great evening. Before you leave, I just want to thank you one more time, and also thank you to the staff of Red Carpet Lounge for staying with us throughout the evening and helping us. Yeah. So hopefully.
And thank you, Roland.
Thanks
to you.
Contact me, email me if you want to keep in touch or have any follow-up questions.
I'll be in touch.
I've done quite a few screenings in the past year, and I still keep in touch with a lot of people that I've met, so that's been a really nice experience for me as well. So, okay, thank you again. Have a great evening.